Hello and welcome to Talking Development. Today I am joined by David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. You've heard me speak before about the importance of tackling the overlapping crises that are threatening development today. Increased poverty, debt, lack of progress on gender equality, climate, fragility, conflict, violence, pandemics, and many more. Not only can these threats set us back in our mission to end poverty, but they also force us to rethink the way we respond to emergencies and accelerate development for the most vulnerable. By 2030, we expect that more than half of the world's extreme poor will live in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence. This is a topic that is often on my mind, which is why I'm very excited about our episode today. As part of efforts to become a better and bigger bank, we are putting a special emphasis on partnerships so that we can achieve greater impact and learn from others. An important partner always, but especially in fragile and conflict-affected situations, is civil society. We work together with the International Rescue Committee in several countries, but also on rethinking concepts and approaches. And I'm so very happy again that David has joined me here today. David, thank you so much for being here with me today. You recently released your Emergency Watchlist for 2024. Can you share what is new with this report? And I noticed you're actually trying to debunk some myths. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the International Rescue Committee is a global humanitarian charity, and we take 60 to 70 indicators of humanitarian need, and we project forward the risks for the coming year, and we identify 20 countries that are most at risk of humanitarian crisis. Here are 2 or 3 new things this year. A rising concentration of extreme poverty in the 20 countries on the watch list. Now, fully 86% of all of those needing humanitarian aid in the world are in these 20 countries. Second point, a growing overlap of conflict and the climate crisis. Obviously, conflict drives humanitarian need, but about 2/3 of the countries on the watch list are in the top quartile of climate vulnerable countries. So we're seeing climate crisis is its own disaster, but it's also driving some of the conflict dynamics. Third point, crucial, the longevity of crisis. These what are called civil wars, these civil conflicts, they are multi-generational. There are countries on the watch list, again, about 2/3 of them, they've not had a year of peace in the last decade. And so those are really important indicators, and they tell us how to do our job and where we need to do our job.
That is quite alarming that you have all these overlaps. And I would add one that we're monitoring very closely, which is the indebtedness of these countries on top of it.
Actually, this year's watch list has a total reduction in the number of of those dependent on humanitarian aid because of the end of the COVID impact on the economy. In last year's watch list, we identified conflict, climate, and the kicker was the economic ripple effects of Ukraine and COVID. Some of that is coming out. Countries like Pakistan have graduated out of the top 20. And so the 300 million in humanitarian need around the world, 86% are in these countries that we're talking about.
Yeah. David, the other thing that I've noticed, which we really also appreciate, is that you are a very strong advocate for IDA, International Development Association, which of course is one of the most important, if not the most important source of finance for the very, very poorest countries around the world. And we want to see a very ambitious replenishment of IDA. You know, we've just started working on it. We had our midterm review. Can you share a little bit, how do you see the role of IDA, particularly in responding to these type of challenges?
Case for expansion, filling the finance gap, is clear from the G20 high-level panel. They proposed the tripling of IDA. They've bottomed out the combination of development impacts, climate impacts, and why that's needed. There is a finance gap. We also think there's a delivery gap, and the delivery gap concerns how to do good work, sustainable work, long-lasting and continuous work in fragile and conflict states where the dynamics of conflict place so many demands on government. Of course, governments lead their countries, but there are places where you just need a wider range of actors to be negotiating access, reaching the hard to reach. And we've got a lot of experience of how you don't substitute for government, but you fill gaps where government can't play. You advise government on how to reach populations, and you reach populations for them. And you develop the kind of partnerships that aren't one-off, that actually become part of the stability and the prosperity of a country. Because we know in our own countries, it's not government monopoly. That's not healthy. And governments lead, yes, but governments shouldn't try and do everything. And I think that the reform of IDA is to better exploit the potential of civil society to sustain service continuity at times of conflict, but also to be the innovators. It's in civil society that you get the innovation. I'm really proud, the International Rescue Committee, we're 3% of the global humanitarian sector, with 30% of evidence and impact evaluations on what works. And I think that delivery gap needs to be filled as well as the finance gap.
So interesting, and one big theme coming out of these IDA discussions right now are really around the renewed emphasis on partnerships. So I think some of these thinking will continue to have together. I want to move away a little bit from the current crisis and talk about another part of our work, which often is much less visible, but it's very important, and that's the way we work together to actually prevent crisis. Do you have any ideas or that you want to share, or any good experiences of how we can work together to actually prevent rather than react when a crisis has already started?
Well, it's so good that you're giving emphasis to this, because we don't want to spend the years just running up a downward escalator. Here's our approach. Humanitarian action, effective humanitarian action, is the first step on the road to development. As long as things are getting worse, as long as the conflicts are multiplying, as long as the crisis is multiplying, we know humanitarian crisis causes political instability. It's obvious, as well as political instability causing humanitarian crisis. So effective humanitarian action is development in action. It's stopping things getting worse, it's building to get better. Second point, the old definition of humanitarian action was keep people alive and then things go back to the way they were after the conflict. That's not the modern world. You've got, because of the long conflicts, you've got to think about education. You've got to think about women's empowerment. You've got to think about economic livelihoods. That's part of the effective humanitarian toolkit, and of course they're part of the development toolkit as well. Third, the partnership emphasis is absolutely key, because you and I know a functioning community needs government leadership, it needs a thriving civil society, and it needs a thriving private sector as well. It's three legs of the stool. And so from my point of view, it's not just a theoretical case that the economic and the social go together. We actually have good evidence, good impact evaluations about how when you add the economic dimension to the social dimension, you get an extra boost for your social outcomes. And that's true, for example, in the case of women's empowerment, when you empower women through village savings and loans, through business grants and training, you actually make a difference on some of the social inequalities that they're facing as well.
I couldn't agree more, and I think, like you say, because these conflicts are so long, and sometimes it's not linear. It's not like you're making progress. Sometimes you're making progress, but then you have a setback. So being able to work closely together to make sure that humanitarian and the development are in sync towards building something that's more sustainable, more prosperous, and doesn't always bring us back, I think is very important. Well, it's complicated.
We have strict entry and exit criteria, because we want to make sure that we're not just somewhere forever. But we take a country like Sudan, which is top of our watch list. We were there in the 2000s. We were actually forced to leave at the end of the 2000s. We went back in 2018. Things seemed to be getting better. Now it's top of our watch list, 25 million people in humanitarian need. And I think we've got to be far more thoughtful and planful about the way in which we engage them.
And it's an interesting example, because we were also there under our strategy of helping countries transition, and now we're actually back to seeing how we can remain engaged because of this back and forth. I have a final question for you, and I love this question, which is, what is one thing that gives you hope this year? One thing that makes you optimistic?
Well, I always quote, if you look at the statistics, you get depressed. If you look at the people, you have hope. And so every refugee I meet who we're resettling in America, I went to northern Nigeria in December after the COP meeting to talk about climate adaptation and learn about it. I meet people in Maiduguri, I meet kids in a school, and I say to them, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they say, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a doctor. So that's where the hope is. The global picture, the global geopolitical scene is pretty dark. The clouds are very heavy, nowhere more so than in Gaza at the moment. But if you want hope, follow the people.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me here today. Here's my take. Poverty is concentrated in countries that are hit on multiple fronts. We heard it, fragility, conflict and violence on the one hand, but climate change on the other. Time is not on our side. The economic consequences on entire countries are already being felt, not to mention the growing and unprecedented human suffering. This pushes us to rethink the way we deliver development work and to consider new models of partnership to be even more effective. We need to recognize that different partners can do different things, and that we need to rely on local actors to access some of the most difficult to reach areas. Knowing where the comparative advantages lie will enable us to accelerate action, focusing on activities that have proven potential to scale up. At the center of all of this, IDA is proving critically important to support early response to escalating crisis, and as an instrument we should continue to invest in. Finally, we need to continue to sharpen our diagnostic tools and work upstream to harness the enormous potential of development to prevent crises before they become full-blown emergencies. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.